I just want you to know I'm wearing I don't know if you can see. Let's see.
Oh, Pinocchio. All right.
Pinocchio, because I thought that that's what Donald Trump is. Welcome to the very first episode of Just the Facts with Jill Wine-Banks, the Watergate girl. And this week, I had a very lucky break at the MSNBC Green Room by running into Sue Craig, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter, whose new book is fascinating. And I am very lucky that she has agreed to come on the show today to talk about her new book, which I'm going to hold up now with my little markings of things I want her to read for us. Lucky Loser. And the subtitle, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. To me, the title says it all, Sue. I love it. It's sort of like a house of cards. And I want to know, why hasn't his house of cards collapsed? Because it is all an illusion.
Well, it's interesting. The title is telling. It is a story about, that spans 100+ years, and it's about luck and loss. And part of the reason it hasn't collapsed is because Donald Trump has had a lot of luck in his life. And we look at the luck just in being born. He was born into an incredibly wealthy family. We can talk more about that, but that just luck, just by being born, netted him more than $400 million throughout his life, including the inheritance that he received from Fred Trump. And then he had another incredible stroke of luck in 2002 and 2003, and that's when he met Mark Burnett, this incredibly talented and experienced reality TV producer. He was, had done Survivor. He was red hot in Hollywood when Donald Trump and he met, and Mark Burnett cast him in The Apprentice. That role took no business acumen at all, and that show incredibly netted him another $400 million, which is kind of shocking. You think, how is a TV host making, for a reality show, making that much? But Donald Trump managed to secure a deal with Burnett where he would get half the product placement money. And it didn't look like a lot at first, but as the show took off and Madison Avenue just fell in love with it, he got a huge amount of product placement money. Corporations were paying to get on the show because it was like a commercial. Yeah. And then he also had a number of licensing deals that came from that. And then he had another stroke of luck where he was essentially forced into a real estate deal against his will. He fought, tooth and nail, and that ended up in an incredible investment for him in 2 apartment buildings with a very experienced New York real estate company that requires no business. Donald Trump has no involvement in it managerially, and that also brings him a lot of money. So we look at that, and then you look at the loss in his life. He used all of this money that he came into and has invested it largely in money-losing businesses that we learned when we got his tax returns in various stages over the course of our reporting over the last almost decade, which is hard to believe, but that's how long we've been looking at this.
Well, we're going to be talking about all 3 of those, but there's a 4th piece of luck, which I'm going to save to the very end, and that is the sort of origins of social media and Fox News. And at the end, you talk about if Nixon had had Fox News, right, basically, we would have had a different outcome of Watergate. And so I want to talk in depth about that. But as you said, the title really says it all. And it reminded me, as I was reading this, of a movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Face in the Crowd with Andy Griffith and Patricia Neal. Oh, Sue, you must watch it.
Okay.
Viewers, watch that movie because it's like prescient. It talks about a drunken guitar player who has charisma and ends up as president. Right. And this was a movie, I think, in the 50s. And it was almost like it was a spoof of Donald Trump. So your book makes the spoof really scary because it delves into, you've already mentioned 3 of the facts that you want listeners and voters to know about Donald Trump, which is, it is an illusion. He is not rich. He is not smart. He doesn't have any business acumen. He has lost more money than he's made, except for these lucky breaks of television creating the illusion And I think you also point out that the mainstream media has fostered that image.
That's a
Can you?
really important part of the book. And
Yeah,
I want to know, I want you to know, it's not that he's not rich. He does have a lot of money. He just doesn't have as much as he would claim to have, the billions and
right,
billions of dollars. Our book
right.
actually doesn't go to his net worth. It just simply looks at these incredible well springs of money that he's gotten and then how he's lost them. And we tell it as this kind of sweeping narrative over, looking at his father and how that came about. But the media is a really interesting part of this book. And it starts in the early 1970s, actually, with comments that he made in my newspaper, the New York Times, just about how much money he was worth. At that time, he was hardly making any money and wasn't worth much of anything, but he started really early on to appropriate his father's wealth to newspaper reporters. He would say, I'm worth 200 million. It grew to 300 to 400 $1 billion. And he was not. That was his father's wealth that he appropriated. And then he started saying that he was running his father's company, and that wealth was his. And he did this for a number of years in order to make himself look larger and to get on those very important lists of the wealthiest people in America. He even got as far as 60 Minutes in 1985, and they were calling him a billionaire with no evidence. Like he was at a private company. Nobody could get inside of it. And people were just repeating it. They were trusting him. Reporters, when somebody's on the record, often they can't get verification. So he takes advantage of that. And people were reporting it. And they weren't taking him, I think, also too seriously. That's another part of the book. At the time, he was more of a tabloid figure in New York than he was a serious businessman. So this illusion started to evolve that he was this billionaire. And then he started buying yachts and helicopters, and he got on these, wealth porn shows, as they were called at the time. Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous is a notable one. And they loved him. Right? Because he was flying around in helicopters and he had all the things that they wanted. Most really rich people wouldn't go on the show because they thought it was, ostentatious, and they just kind of ran the other way. But Donald Trump ran to the camera.
So there are 2 points that you're making here. One is the same was true when The Apprentice was being developed. Mm-hmm. The founders of that tried to get like Branson and other really rich people. And they all went, no, I'm not going to spend my time on that. So they ended up with Donald Trump. And the other thing that you mentioned, and I want you to talk about that, but first I want you to talk about his relationship with his father. He denied that his father gave him anything of value. He never admitted that it was his father's money. Right. He really was, his father remained loyal to him despite that, even though his father and mother sent him to a military academy, which apparently, not apparently, but your book makes very clear, influenced him a great deal. So can you talk about some of those, the personal relationship with his father and maybe his mother too, but particularly his father?
Well, I think his father is a very significant figure. And you see, the reason that it's a focus of Russ and I, my coworker and friend that I wrote the book with, is right. Donald Trump ran on this idea that he was this self-made billionaire. These stories are, I'm Canadian, and you don't see this sort of myth making in Canada, but in America, it's like everything. You want this like up from nothing story. It's really important, and it's sort of part of the bloodstream of America, these success stories. And he really wanted this. And he, in fact, was born into a wealthy family, and Fred Trump very early on started transferring wealth in different ways to his children, to all of them. For example, Fred had 2 huge housing complexes, Beach Haven and Shore Haven. They're in the New York area. And he put the land under them in a trust for his children. So his kids owned the land, he owned the buildings, and he would actually pay his kids rent. And this happened in the 1940s. So this was kind of the first thing we saw. We found it in New York property records. And then as time goes on, you see him giving them, we got Fred Trump's gift tax returns back to the 1940s. He would give them money. And he would also, there was a collection of buildings that he gave them. And then as Donald Trump goes on in life, he's the heir apparent. There was a struggle for power within Fred. Fred really wanted an heir. He had a namesake son who was supposed to take over. And that didn't work out. I think quite early on, it was Fred Jr. And he I think initially it looked like he was going to go into the family business, but he had other interests. He wanted to be a pilot, and Fred had no time for that. So by the time Donald is 16, 17, in that range, it looks like he is going to be the heir because Fred is sort of cast aside. He eventually, it's really sad, he dies of alcoholism in his early 40s. And so Donald is put into this position, and his whole life, up until even recently, he was getting money from an investment that Fred Trump made. But over his life, he got loan guarantees from his father. He benefited just hugely in his early career from Fred Trump's connections. Fred Trump was friends with Abe Beame, the former mayor of New York, and helped him navigate the system then. He paid for high-priced consultants for Donald to help him navigate projects in the 70s and 80s. There was even a time when Donald Trump was sort of laid low and he was having trouble meeting his payments on the casinos, and Fred Trump had a bookkeeper come into the casino and make a $3.5 million payment to the cashier to cover an interest payment on a bond. And there was charges ensued after that because obviously it was illegal to do that. But you see throughout his life, over and over, he gave him a lot of money, and a lot more money than his siblings. And then Donald Trump inherited a huge amount of money. And all through this, Fred and Donald have some similarities. And there's a funny one that people can relate to. Russ and I, I went to the Library of Congress at one point because there were some documents down there that I was interested in, and some of them had Fred Trump's handwriting, and some of them were actually in all caps. Like, I phoned Russ and I was like, no way. Yeah. Like, I was just like, you can't make this up. So like the original.
I want a picture of that. Do you have photos of that?
I don't have them like handy to put up, but I could, but they're crazy. So, but for the most part, the two men were very different. You know, Fred Trump stuck to his knitting. He was a builder. He would build different projects. He would do what he promised. He didn't take on debt. In fact, he loved cash. He didn't give personal guarantees. All these things that that Donald Trump ended up doing famously that got him into trouble. Fred Trump didn't do it. But Fred Trump wanted an heir. He had it in Donald, and it just seems like everywhere we turned, all we could find was Fred Trump praising Donald. We could see no point where he questioned him. And I actually ran into a fellow who traveled in New York real estate circles back then and knew both Fred and Donald, and also knew the sons and the fathers of other real estate, sort of big wigs in town. And he told me, he said those men were incredibly hard on their sons. But he'd run into Fred Trump and Fred would be like, there's my Donnie, isn't he doing great? And we think that this came to define sort of Donald Trump's one-way street of loyalty that he sees. His father would say in all these newspaper articles, everything Donald Trump turns, that he touches turns to gold. Of course, it wasn't true.
But Sue, did you find out a reason why Fred would continue to be loyal to a son who was so disrespectful and so ungrateful? I mean, it's obvious in reading your book that he just kept on denying the role of his father.
Right.
Why would his father stay loyal to him?
And up until this day, he was just on the debate stage with Kamala Harris saying he didn't inherit that money.
Right.
Right. It's hard to know what was going on in the Trump household. Was Fred really tough on him behind the scenes? We don't know. But I think what we see publicly is this just unquestioning support. And I think if I had to come up with an explanation, it would be that Fred Trump very much wanted to keep the family business in the family. And we know that from things that he has written down regarding his will. And I think Donald Trump made his decision that Donald was going to be the one to take over. And once that decision was made, Donald had his unquestioning support. And that's as close as we can come to any sort of understanding. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Fred also had a little bit of the showman in him. We found just incredible. Like it was usually after he had built a project where he had this showman in him that Donald has. And these similarities are there. And Fred, I'm sure, recognized them in Donald. But in the end, it really didn't make sense. And to the point where there was one scene, and it is still in the book, and when we found out about it, it just sent a chill through me. And Fred seemed to still support Donald to the point he didn't even confront him after this thing that happened. And what it was during Donald Trump's troubles with the casinos, when he needed money, he actually sent 2 lawyers out to see Fred, and he tried to change Fred's will to his advantage. He tried to change his father's will. And he was caught, and Marianne Trump, who was a judge, Donald's sister, intervened and worked with her parents to make sure that this couldn't happen.
Wow.
But that's how craven Donald was. And
See, I thought you were going to say something else, Sue.
I was well, Fred never questioned him. He actually went to Marianne and kind of went around, and we know this from depositions that we've read that the family gave. But what were you thinking I was going to say?
Well, you have a very vivid part about his being at a military academy. Apparently, his parents gave up on his being an unruly, uncontrollable child, and they sent him to a military academy in New York.
Yeah.
And the one scene is the photograph where they're supposed to draw their sabers, and Donald refuses. And the picture actually shows everybody with their sabers out and pointing, and Donald refusing.
Right.
And it just seems like he was a spoiled brat his whole life. What else do we know about his time at the military academy?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story about leading up to how he got there. There's some crazy stuff that happened before that. And one of them that really sticks in my mind is we talked to somebody who hung out with Donald at the time, and the Trumps belonged to a country club, and they would go there, and they had a cabana on the beach, and they'd play card games and stuff. And Donald Trump would, according to this fellow that we spoke to, and he saw it, he would wait on the high diving board, and then he would wait for guests to walk by, and then when they did, he would jump off and splash them. And then he would deny it afterwards. And so he was doing stuff like, it's kind of like everybody knows a kid like this when you're growing up. But we talked to somebody else who had he threw a rock through her window. So this is all leading up to Fred. There was a couple incidents that led up. These were 2 of them to him going to the military academy. Then he gets to the military academy, and you see this sort of just defiance, right? You mentioned the saber incident. And for some part, he was sort of hands off, and there's a lot of speculation that Fred had a hand in some things that happened at the New York Military Academy. There was a parade, and Donald got to march in the front, and that made no sense to anybody other than potentially Fred pulled the strings. But another
It's
incident,
a very powerful part of your book, is just reading that, is for sure it wasn't on his ability that he was at the front of the line.
No, George Whittick, who's now George White, this other cadet definitely should have been. And there's the kids there remember this as if it's yesterday. They're now in their 70s. They all remember it. And then there was another incident that really just floored me when I heard about it. And it was regarding a cadet who Donald was friends with. His name was Michael Scadron. And they would pal around. They were quite good friends. And one day Donald walked into Michael's room, and it was senior year, and they were about to go have their pictures taken for the school book, for the yearbook. And Donald saw that Michael had more medals on his jacket. So he asked Michael if he could wear his jacket to the school photo, and Michael didn't care. He said, sure. So that famous photo where you see Donald in the uniform at the New York Military Academy for senior year, that's actually Michael's jacket. And interestingly, that's the only appearance that Michael's jacket makes in the yearbook, because Michael got into a really nasty, horrible fight right after this. Somebody made a racial slur towards him that I won't repeat, but he got so angry, and he had it's kind of weird even telling this because it's so crazy, but in his room he had a broomstick with a metal chain tied to it, and he would walk around the campus like swinging it. The violence, and there's violent incidences that I talk about in the book, was sort of always prevalent there. But that day he took that broomstick with the metal chain on it, and he beat that kid almost within an inch of his life, and he was expelled. And
of course, Donald liked the violence. He always has associated with violent people. But again, lucky loser is the illusion. And again, there's the illusion of Donald Trump wearing a jacket with a lot of medals that he did not earn. It was all an illusion. It's like him answering the phone with another name or calling people and saying, I want you to know how rich Donald Trump is, which was him making that phone call.
Right.
But so your book is filled with facts, it's filled with truth. It's filled with the detailed background and citations to the data that you rely on.
Yeah.
Why are there millions of people who are still believing when Donald Trump says whatever he says? Why are there people pretending that he isn't a lunatic? Why is your paper sane washing what Donald Trump says? How can we make people see the facts that are reported here and in other sources as well?
And if I had the answer to that, I think I'd, yeah. I sure wish I did. I was going to say I'd be on the news networks all the time trying to explain it. I don't know. I think we talked about Nixon at the outset, and I know you want to end on that, but I think we all live in these bubbles now, and it's hard. Russ and I have spent 9 years trying to unravel this, and I'm glad you looked at the footnotes, because we tried to footnote everything. It took us months just to do those footnotes, because we want people to see them now. We want people who are skeptical, if they want to open this book, give us a try and then look at the footnotes. We have tax returns as documents, we've got recordings as documents, we've gone back to primary sources, and we've really tried to get to the truth. I don't say a truth, because I think there are cases where there's facts. Some things can be in dispute, but a lot of things aren't. And Russ and I have really tried to get to that. But I think people are just set in. They want to believe what they're going to believe. And they listen to, whether it's Fox or other networks that sort of just push their view. And I think this country has just ended up in these silos that it's unfortunate. But I hope this book does break through. I mean, I think we really, we tried with a lot of facts to tell a story. And I hope it does, because I really believe that we've come to a very accurate reporting of what happened.
So let's talk about, you mentioned the luck of running into Mark Burnett.
Yeah.
Talk about The Apprentice. And it seemed to be, when I was reading this, when he was really desperate for money, when he was really in bad trouble, he ended up on The Apprentice by partly the luck of no one else would do it. And reality TV was, in its heyday then.
Yeah.
And even in that regards, he cheated. He did side deals. I mean, he is a cheat.
That part is wild to me, that he bit the hand that fed him. We can talk about how he got on there, but then he goes and he tries to do side deals around Mark Burnett. And Donald Trump, we don't claim in the book that he has no skill. He's an incredibly charismatic person. That's why he was chosen for The Apprentice. But for a lot of people, he is. And I was actually just watching yesterday CBS Sunday Morning show, and they actually did a whole segment on fame and people meeting famous people. Yeah. And it really reminded me of Trump and just the effect that he can have on people. And at the time, Mark Burnett saw, and because we talked about how Jack Welch and some other billionaires were looked at for the show, and they either didn't have time or they weren't charismatic enough. But when Mark Burnett took The Apprentice to Hollywood and pitched it to NBC, Jeff Zucker was in the room, goes on to be the executive at CNN. They wanted Mark Burnett. They wanted to get into the reality TV space, and they were interested not in Donald Trump, but in Mark Burnett. And there's a scene in the book where they talk about how they know he's a character and kind of a joke in New York, but they knew he would draw eyeballs, and they talk about that, and they were right. But Mark Burnett recreates Donald Trump into this measured, sort of rich businessman that he's not. And I remember this incredible scene where his producers first come out to New York. They've been in the jungles of, filming Survivor, and they come in and they just can't believe what they found. The furniture was chipped, the carpet was it was foul, according to them. And they had to recreate not only Donald Trump into this successful businessman that all these young aspiring CEOs that were going to be on the show would want to work for, but they even had to recreate his office space. They built a new boardroom and just redid the whole thing. And there's a 3-minute intro to The Apprentice that would run every week, and in that they just made him out to be the most successful thing ever. And they all told me later it wasn't real. It was reality TV. I hate the word reality because it's not reality, but they made him out into something that he wasn't. And that show was played over and over and over. And it seeped into the bloodstream of America. And so many people still believe he's successful, no matter how many facts you present about all of his business losses that we've been able to show. But then you picked up on something, which is, so he's getting a ton of money from The Apprentice. He doesn't have, Mark Burnett's producing the thing. It's all Mark Burnett and his team, and they're incredibly skilled people. I talked to a number of them. And Donald Trump has to show up and he has to do some on-camera work. And then he gets half of this product placement money. So it was so crazy. At one point, corporations were paying up to $4 or $5 million to be on it. And Donald Trump would get half of every check that came in for product placement. And then he was doing licensing deals. But then we found that he was starting to go around Mark Burnett to get deals on his own that Mark Burnett rightfully should have been cut into. And I couldn't believe this, because I was like, why didn't you guys say something? I'm sort of thinking about it from just a pure cheating point of view. And all the Hollywood people came back to me and said, if we said something, we would have lost the talent. So we sort of had them over the barrel. Like, they couldn't call him out on it. And he was striking all these side deals that we could see. We found at least 2 or 3 in the book that we found.
Oh, there was one really touching scene of, he had promised something which would have amounted to a lot of money. And instead he delivered a golf club that was signed by him on the cover. And the person says, basically, he didn't sue because it wasn't worth the cost of suing. And I've talked to people involved in the construction of Trump Tower Chicago, which, by the way, is polluting the Chicago River and has just been sued for that, just in the same way that I believe Donald Trump is polluting our airways.
And he's classified that building as worthless on his tax returns, right?
Well, and it has had a lot of failure. It didn't sell out. No. People weren't buying into it. And he cheated people who had bought early because he realized he could sell them for more than he had agreed to sell it for.
The Friends and Family program. Yes.
I mean, it's unreal. And I have to say, my producer, Simon, is listening to us right now, but he had me take a picture during the convention with my middle finger raised at the Trump lettering, which is reviled in Chicago because it's this huge, awful looking thing. Anyway, a lot of people won't go to the restaurant in the building because it's in the Trump building. I'm one of those people. But anyway, we're diverting from from his cheating and doing all these things. But people involved in the construction said, we said we were going to sue, and his lawyer said, no, you're not. We withheld just enough money that it will cost you too much to sue to collect it, so you're not going to sue. They deliberately calculate what's the cost of a suit, and we're going to withhold payment for the final construction in that amount that will not cause you to sue. I mean, to me, that is just so despicable that, and it seems to be a repeat characteristic of Donald Trump.
No, it's a theme in the book, to the point where we talk to people who actually were involved in either building or renovating the golf courses, and some people wouldn't sign the final papers that were needed for the building to open until they got paid. I mean, they knew who he was, but he so often just calculated that the cost of somebody suing him would be far greater. And so many people, these are small businesses, a lot of them. It was devastating to talk to some of these people, because they said they either, they went out of business, or they'd have to lay off people, like real lives, lives were involved in this. But he continued to do it. And the Apprentice scene, it was funny, the fellow didn't actually think he was going to sue, but he had a calculation in his head. If I say something, I'm going to risk pissing off the talent. I can't afford that. So then he made that decision. But everybody throughout there are making these calculations, based on, not wanting, in that case, they didn't want to offend him. But Donald Trump's then making calculations about all the people he owes money to, including lawyers. Some people don't feel sorry for lawyers, but like they weren't getting paid. They should get paid if he's agreed to pay them. But all these service people, it was really sad.
Yeah. So let me divert to another subject, which is two things that I found missing in the book were much information about Melania and only a few references to Weisselberg. Was that a deliberate choice to leave Melania out? And Weisselberg, who has recently been released from Rikers, having served many months in Rikers twice because of refusing to come clean and tell the truth about Donald Trump. So it seemed to me, and he had a big role in this. Was it a lack of evidence? Why was Weisselberg not in, and why was Melania not in?
We talk about Weisselberg in the book, but we just didn't have enough to really make him into a character. It's a narrative, and we knew that he knew, and we say that, and we've got a few scenes like that, but he just didn't. In terms of, we tried to get a hold of him. Of course, he's not going to talk, but we had so much other stuff, and so we made some hard decisions. And Melania, I think one of the great scenes in the book is their wedding, but it focused on all the stuff that people were, that Donald Trump was able to get for free at the wedding. It was like the apprentice crew came through for him. They were the get stuff for free people, and that was interesting. But she just, the book focuses a lot on his financial life. So we talk about Ivana, and we talk about Marla Maples, but a lot of what we talked about in the book was what their financial settlements were, and sort of what the heartache was when those relationships broke up. So I guess we just sort of had to make some decisions. And with Melania, we kind of ended at the White House. I know there's been discussions about that she got a post-nup agreement when she went down to Washington, but we don't have the details on that. I haven't seen them anywhere. So we didn't kind of delve into that.
Do you think I hate to say it out of my mouth, but if he should ever move back into the White House, do you think she will go with him? She has been nowhere on the campaign trail virtually.
Wow, that's a crystal ball question. It's a hard one. Yeah. I don't know. I would, just as somebody watching all this, I think she will. I think she liked her time in the White House, and she likes sort of the trappings that go around with it. I mean, it may be hard for some people to process that, but I've heard from people that she did. And she's putting out a book right now that really leans into, her role. So I would guess yes, but I don't know. Yeah.
So there's some really good stuff on page 437 of your book. And this goes back to his announcement. And after this, I want to get to the epilogue, which is my favorite part of the book. I love the epilogue. But it starts with, "So ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for president of the United States, and we are going to make this country great again." And then he launches into this dystopian description and totally racist stuff, particularly about Mexicans. And as a result of that, if you can go to the part, his words landed, and read for us the part about what happened at NBC that ended his
tell me when to stop,
money chain.
I'll start reading. Yeah. His words landed hard in the offices across the country that marketed products under Trump's name to a wide audience. Paul Telegi, then the head of unscripted television at NBC, had thought he might be replacing Trump to avoid equal time issues in a presidential race. But now he saw the problem as more immediate. He called within the hour and told Trump that he had a few days to retract these statements, or things are going to go very wrong for you here. "What are you saying?" Trump asked. "I'm saying we won't be able to be in business with someone who is outrageous," Telegi responded. Trump called Telegi a pussy and threatened to sue. Want me to keep going?
No, I think that gets the point across about that was the end of the money that Trump had been relying on to stay afloat.
Right. And the
And
licensing deals, right? Those were
yes,
just so,
yeah,
yeah, those were like, I talk to people, it's going to sound crazy, but this is like what we were doing for so many years. I tracked down the person who took the Trump perfume bottles off the shelves at Macy's, and they were sent back to a warehouse and they were sent into the gray market. But they were like that, like done. Like that's how fast it happened. And there's speculation, we'll never know, that he ran for president because he wanted to sort of boost his brand again. It had been
yes,
falling because it's just these things go through cycles. You're hot, you got a big show, you get all these things, and then after 10 years, it starts to fall. And then it just fell off the cliff when he rode down the elevator and said what he did about Mexicans and everything. But there's a scene in the book too, which is related to NBC. They knew how successful he was going to be because they had data on Donald Trump and how popular he was that would make pollsters' heads spin. Like these networks, they know everything and they monitor it minute by minute when it's on the screen. So that was also an interesting thing we found out from the folks at NBC.
interesting. So let's go to the epilogue and talk about his most lucky break of all, which is the creation of Fox News.
Yes.
And I mean, you can either describe it, or I found page 445 and 446 particularly interesting, starting with, here's the part that may sting most in a country that sees itself as history's greatest meritocracy. And just even that paragraph, I think, continue in that paragraph.
Oh, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Where does it start and all?
In the middle of page 445.
Oh yeah, I'll start there. Yeah, here this is such a, I think, really relevant point to today. Here is the part that may sting most in a country that sees itself as history's greatest meritocracy. Good things happened to Donald Trump. He did not earn most of those good things. He was born. He was discovered by a revolutionary television producer, and he was pushed into an investment against his will. And from those 3 bits of good luck came the equivalent today of more than $1.5 billion. That sort of tailwind could paper over a litany of failure and still fund a lavish life. And there is no evidence that in 50 years of labor, Donald Trump added to his lucky fortunes. He would have been better off betting on the stock market than on himself.
And then you go on to talk about 5 decades before Trump pumped his fist on the steps of Marine One, President Richard Nixon struck a similarly defiant pose at the same spot. He turned before entering the helicopter, flashed an awkwardly broad smile, and raised both arms in his signature victory sign, which my generation associates with peace in Vietnam. And then, but the courses of their presidencies leading up to their forced departures differed in at least one very distinct way. Nixon had spent the prior 2 years denying that his administration had any involvement with a break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington. Republicans stood by him. 3 impeachment votes failed, but then the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Nixon's claims of executive privilege and forced him to release recordings of White House meetings, including one of him orchestrating a cover-up. And you go on to talk about how congressional Republicans then went to him and said, resign or you will be convicted in a trial in the Senate. But the difference now, talk about that. Just talk about what happened to Trump and the luck of Fox News.
What I'm going to read from it, because I just think it's so laid out, like we lay it out just as But unlike Nixon, Trump did not have anywhere to turn. During his lifetime, a new media ecosystem had come into an existence, one eager to explain away evidence of any Republican president's wrongs and endlessly magnify the thinnest assertion of any Democrat's missteps. That ecosystem evolved from talk radio in the 1980s and gained dominance on cable television in the 1990s with the launch of Fox. Trump was the most perfectly imperfect vessel for the realm of Fox News. I could keep going, but what Richard Nixon didn't have was that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It does make the point very, I urge people to get the book and read it for themselves. This is starting at page 446, 447, and you do go on to say that have we reached the breaking point, basically? On page 447, there have been moments when the ecosystem showed signs of strain. Fox paid $787 million to settle a lawsuit filed by the voting machine company that Trump's representatives and Tucker Carlson said had flipped votes to Biden, and which unfortunately people still believe, even though it's totally a lie.
And Fox is paid
right.
huge amounts of money.
Now there's another lawsuit that's being settled. We don't know the terms of it yet, but a different voting machine company, and hopefully with the same huge damages being paid. And hopefully media are going to start telling the truth because they realize there are financial consequences to lying. That's all that I can hope for, because neither you or I has been able to answer the question of how we get from the illusion to the facts, how we can get people to actually believe the facts, how, when I read the New York Times online, I click through to all the links because I don't want to take the conclusion of the reporter. I want to see the documents that underlie it. Yeah. In the same way that people reading this should look at your footnotes, because that way they know that what you're saying is the facts and that you are full of facts and this is nothing but the facts.
And we talked to so many people to get a narrative, and all those people are mentioned. And I want to also say two more things, just that so many people went on the record in this book. This is not like I can count, I think, on one hand, people that we gave anonymity. People wanted to talk. Right. And I think that that's important. And can I just leave with the ending of the book?
Yes.
I think it really gets at a lot of things that
Absolutely.
we were trying to say. We write, it is too soon to tell whether Trump's rise has been singular to him or has revealed a shift in American culture and politics that will last. But this version of America, a place with no agreed upon facts, where being a person of one's word no longer matters, where one man's self-created problems serve as a proxy for a nation under attack. This is the world Donald Trump wants it to be. America voters now have a third chance to decide whether that's the world they want.
That's a very good way to end. I'm wearing a Pinocchio pin because you show him as Pinocchio, but maybe I should have been wearing a vote pin because that's the message of your book. It's up to us.
It's up to us.
Because
I do think facts still matter to a huge amount of this country. Yes. I'm here to say that from the rooftops, and we care, and we really worked hard to get this right. And I hope more people, I want people from Republicans to read it. I want everybody to read it because
me too. And I thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to talking again sometime nearer the election and seeing what's going on.
I'd love that,
Joan.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.